we're going to learn how to make these easy knit and purl fingerless gloves. And you can see it starts with a little bit of a rib section, and then there's a stockinette section alternating with a garter stitch section. So there are lots of interesting techniques on these gloves, and yet they're still very easy to do. They are knit flat and then stitched together, so you can use regular straight needles. I am using size 8 needles, and this is a Vanna's Choice yarn. So you can use any cast on you like. I am going to use the Continental cast on. So we just start with a slip knot. Remember that the Continental cast on is very similar to a knit stitch. Needles are parallel. Insert the right needle. Right needle goes behind the left. Wrap the yarn counterclockwise. Pull it through. Pull it out a little bit so that there's a little space. And then your left needle comes in front of the stitch, and again up parallel with the right needle. The right needle goes behind. You now have 2. That was your slip knot. That's the one you just made. You're ready to do it again. So wrap the yarn counterclockwise, pull the loop through, pull them out a little bit, and you're going to continue on like that until you have 25. I have my 25 stitches cast on. I have counted them a second time to double check. And now for this first row is just going to be knit and purl. One tip for making your stitches tight is every time after you knit, when you set up the purl stitch, right there after you wrap it, you just kind of give it a little tug, just to make sure that your knit stitch, that transition stitch is tight. So I just did a knit. It's always the first one after your last knit. So if it's sometimes 2x2 rib, you do knit 1, knit 2, and then it's the next purl is where you pull it tight. So there I've done my purl. I'm going to just give it a little tug right there. And that just helps keep it tidy. Here we are at the end of the first row, and I will be careful to use a row counter on this project. So as soon as I hit the end of the row, I like to click it over to now show that it is on 2 while I am knitting row 2. There's more information in another video on the Cushion of Joy site about stitch markers and row counters if you'd like to learn more about that. So on the first row we did knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, and now we're on row 2, it's going to be purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. And the reason is with the rib stitch, you want all the purls lined up on top of each other and all of the knits lined up on top of each other. Oops, I got a twisted stitch. So you just continue like this, back and forth, until you have 5 rows of your rib stitch. Now I have my 5 rows of rib stitch, and I am ready for row 6, which is a row of knitting. So this is our stockinette section. So we do a row of knit and then a row of purl. We're about at the end of our knit row. And turn the work. Then we're going to purl when we go back. So remember to hold your yarn in front, up over the needle. And you're just going to purl all the way across. So on the back of the work you are purling, on the front of the work you are knitting. Okay, so I'm now ready, set up for row 10. And from here, on this section now, we're just going to knit for the next several rows. Now I've just finished row 13. I'm about to start row 14. And you can see we have our 1x1 rib at the bottom, and then we have a nice stockinette row, and then we have a little section of garter stitch where we get these cute little ripple ridges in the middle. And the pattern now just repeats in sections like this, where you have a section of stockinette and then a section of garter stitch until you get to the end, and it's time to do one more section of 1x1 rib. I have finished all of my rows, and it is time to bind off. ideally you might want a stretchy bind off here, like Jenny's stretchy bind off, or you can do a traditional bind off and just think about doing it a little more loosely. There is a video on the site for how to do Jenny's stretchy bind off. For today, I think I'm just going to do the simple or traditional bind off. So knit the first stitch. I'm going to knit the second one. Pass that right loop over the left and off the needle, so you just have one left. Knit one more, and again pass that stitch over. And you're kind of thinking about being loose, so this actually fits around your hand when you're done. And we're just going to continue like that all the way across the row. I finished my bind off, and here I have the last stitch. I'm just going to pull that out a little bit and then make quite a long tail. So I've got a couple of, maybe 2 feet, because you need plenty of yarn to then sew the side closed. Here at my loop at the top, this is where I just took my needle out, I'm going to pull that end all the way through, kind of make that a little knot. So now you are going to first decide which end you want to be near your fingers and which by your wrist. Maybe whichever one is a little stretchier is going to go by your wrist, and if one's a little less stretchy, maybe it goes by your fingers, maybe it doesn't matter. Now you're going to fold the 2 right sides of the fabric together, and you're going to pin it so that when you stitch it closed, all the stitches stay put and it's lined up like you want. So I want to kind of check to make sure my little ribs, my garter stitch, is lined up the way that I want. Do that on each one. I'm probably going to put a pin each time we get back to that garter stitch section. And then we're just going to use a really simple whip stitch to go around and seal this off. So I need a yarn needle, and I'm coming off the back, so I'm going to start by going around towards the front. I'm just going to go all the way through, a little sandwich. With that first one, you probably need to go in again, not far from where you are, not far from the end. And now you want to think about just laying the yarn over. You can see one was right here, one was right here. So just every, 1/4 of an inch or so, you're going to go back in, always the same direction. So you're just laying that yarn across the top in a nice even stitch. And you want to be near the edge, but also grabbing enough of the fabric that it's not pulling one loop all by itself. I am not that worried about whether it is picking up every single loop. It will manage to catch it anyway. After you go down an inch or two, we need to leave a hole for your thumb. And if you can see on mine, on this one that's finished, I left the hole for my thumb, kind of if these are the fingers, just past that first garter stitch section, and then open across the next one down to right before this one. So that was the right size for my hand for the little thumb hole. Okay. So our next step is to leave that hole. So I am down just past the garter stitch section on this glove. I'm just going to wrap it in the yarn in an extra time, and don't close it all the way closed. I'm going to leave a loop. Loop my needle through twice to tie a knot. So that doesn't feel super secure to me, so I'm going to do it once more. Whoops. one more knot. Okay, and then I'm actually just going to weave this thread down the edge, go in a little bit and then back, kind of like little overlaps. All the way down to where I want to connect my yarn again. Okay, so about there. So then I go back through, and now I'm going to tie another knot. Okay, pull it all the way down so it's right on my fabric. And then I'm going back to whip stitching. Put an extra one right there so it's a little bit reinforced. Continue to the end. All right, so here I am at the end. And I'm going to just do an extra one again. And then I have this is the tail piece from where I started my project. And ultimately I'll tie those together, but a pro tip here is to take out your pins and check to make sure that it all worked the way you want it to before you completely tie it off, because at this point it's still fixable. You could go back and pretty easily undo all of that stitching that we just did if it's not the way you want it. Okay. So that's what mine looks like. I can try it on, see that it fits. It does fit like I want. My thumb is like I want. So that's all very good. And I'm ready then to close it off. I'm going to turn it wrong side out again. And I am just simply going to tie those two ends in a square knot. So left over right, right over left. And then weave the ends in and you'll be all done. And that will be your finished fingerless gloves. I hope you had a great time. Well done.